To actually take some code and paste it into the Ruby interpreter. Okay. I also took the liberty of creating 3 accounts we can play with. My account with $1,000, Dave's with $5,000, and Bill Gates with a lot more than either of us. So we'll come back to that. So now you know instance variables. You know that you have to define explicit getters and setters on instance variables. On the other hand, the getters and setters that we defined are pretty darn trivial. And it would be nice, right? This, to me, as soon as you start seeing stuff like this, where you've read this method and now you know what's coming, this is a sign that the language isn't supporting you. So might there be a more concise way? If these accessors and setters are such a common case, shouldn't there be a way to support them that is a little more elegant? And indeed there is. Let me do that again. Old way, new way. I just made code disappear. Okay? So what is this magic @_accessor thing? It's not part of the language. It is just a regular old method call. And in a moment, we're going to start talking more about metaprogramming, which is code that defines and writes and runs new code at runtime. And one thing I said when I began introducing Ruby is I'm only going to talk about these highfalutin modern language features because I believe they help you write cleaner code that is easier to read and understand. This is an example. In fact, in the next homework assignment, one of the things you're going to do is you're going to essentially create your own more sophisticated version of @_accessor. But when you say @_accessor balance, what you're basically saying is, please create for me these 2 methods, a default getter and a default setter that just do the obvious thing. And you can figure out how it does it, right? I mean, if you had to print out the text of those 2 methods based on @_accessor, you could do it. The difference is in Ruby, pretty much, if you can print it out at runtime, you can also execute it at runtime. And that's very cool. So a quick review of Ruby's distinguishing features that we've seen. First of all, it is object-oriented in the extreme. Even the lowliest integers are objects. There's really no such thing as attributes. There's instance variables, but you have to define explicit getters and setters because you have to get at them through methods. Everything is a method call. Usually the only thing you care about in a method call is whether the receiver responds to the method you're trying to send it. And we'll have a lot more to say about that in a moment when we shortly talk about duck typing. And we've talked about the fact that objects can have different types, but the variables that refer to those objects are not typed. And as we'll see, most of the expressions that we've seen are non-destructive. So we gave examples of like adding strings together, adding arrays together. We're going to see some functions that let you select and remove elements and rearrange arrays. In almost all cases, with a few exceptions that we'll identify, those functions don't modify the receiver. They return a new copy of an object. And that's part of Ruby's heritage as being functionally flavored from the functional programming community. With all that in mind, let's ask a question about instance variables and their friends. Let's hypothetically assume, and in a moment we'll show that this is not hypothetical, you could really do this, that we could add stuff to Ruby's built-in string class. Here's a super useful method called curvy that basically will return true if the uppercase version of the string includes, or fails to include any curvy characters. Fails to include any curvy characters. Don't worry too much about the functionality of curvy. What I'd like to know is, which of these is the way that you would call it? Would you call it string.curvy? Would you call it directly on a string receiver? So think about that for a moment.